Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to take the opportunity in that silence to take it over, and you're all very, very welcome here. And thank you for joining the 2023 Dairy Sustainability Symposium. I'm Dermot Farrell, and I'm the chair of the Dairy Council of Northern Ireland. Just a couple of housekeeping things that we need to take care of in the event of a fire or in the event of an argument, either of which can happen. There are doors in every direction. Just don't fall across each other as you are making your way to the door with big steps. To my right, there will be food and lunch will be served here, and you can escape into the room on my left in order to eat the food there. But I can remind you of that, and please feel welcome, everybody, please, to stay for lunch. We are under a reasonable amount of time pressure. We have effectively 3 presentations, each of whom are around 20 minutes. So we will have limited time for questions, but we'll see as the day progresses how much question time there actually is. So you're all very welcome. I do see a lot of very familiar faces here this morning, and many of you have attended these events before. Some of you will not. So hence I will briefly set out the purpose of this morning's symposium. The EU Sustainable Dairy Programme is a European-funded, multi-country programme initiated by the European Milk Forum, of which the Dairy Council is a member. So for the past 6 years, in conjunction with colleagues across Europe, the Dairy Council have endeavoured to share research, to share facts, to share solutions, and how best to create the most sustainable dairy sector for the generations to come. In Northern Ireland, the dairy sector is hugely important to our local economy, providing thousands of jobs and producing significant volumes of high-quality, nutritious dairy products that are shipped throughout the world. We are well aware of the need to develop new solutions that makes agriculture more environmentally sustainable and at the same time boost productivity, efficiency, and ultimately farm family profitability. We are also well aware that we have to produce more from less in the years ahead. We have been set challenging decarbonisation targets through the Northern Ireland Executive's Climate Change Act and the Path to Net Zero Energy Strategy. We also know that there are incentives and opportunities for farmers and our industry through the DERA Green Growth Strategy and the Department for the Economy 10X Economic Strategy. We also recognise that in order to avail of these opportunities and demonstrate improvement in environmental targets, we need credible data and credible information and the application of technologies, some of whom we know and some of which are still under development right across our industry. That information and data will bring direction and credibility to the whole process of improvement. Hence, the theme of this year's programme is Data in Action. And during the course of the morning, you will hear various speakers explain how the sector continues to evolve and how the collection and analysis of data from various sources, including soil nutrient samples, animal sensors, milk quality testing, and farm management software, will provide dairy farmers with a comprehensive understanding of their animals and their farm management operations. This in turn will allow them to take timely, informed and ultimately cost-effective decisions to improve efficiency and productivity, whether that be in respect of energy use, feed management, breeding policies, milk yield, and for animal health, to assess the risk of stress and disease in their farm animals early. So today's programme, and in a few moments, I will hand you over to George Moffat. George is the Deputy Director of the Agricultural Policy Division in DERA, and he will give an overview of the strategic policies and the work that the department is engaged in. We will then watch an insightful video interview with Professor John Gilliland, in which he will talk to our DCNI Chief Executive Ian Stevenson about the purpose of the ARC Zero project, about its early findings, and how more can be done to transform the sector in the years ahead. Following that, we are excited to introduce Dr. Jonathan Bell, Head of Land and Sea Policy at the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, which is a wildlife conservation charity, to tell us about an innovative partnership between the Dairy Council and the RSPB, and to understand what farmers can do to improve biodiversity on their farms. Then, if time allows, at around 12:30, we will have a panel discussion with some local farmers. Always very, very important to bring the practical aspect of the application of these policies into the room. So we will hear from John Oliver, Mark Billock and David Thompson, and they will talk about the challenges and opportunities facing them on their farms and in our sector, and how data and information has helped them to make informed decisions around their businesses. Ian will facilitate that discussion. We aim to wrap up at around 1 o'clock and serve lunch, just as I have explained, and you are really welcome to take that opportunity to network and discuss the topics that are on show today. If you are involved in social media, can I encourage you to follow and tag the Dairy Council account, and if you're tweeting about today's event, use Sustainable Dairy EU hashtag. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to welcome to the stage the Deputy Director of the Agricultural Policy Division of DERA, George Moffat.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Dermot, for the warm welcome. And thank you for the opportunity to come to your symposium today to give the high-level overview of DERA's Farm Support and Development Programme and how data will be central to the delivery of that programme going forward. I know some in the audience will have attended recent meetings around the country, and some of this presentation will be familiar to them. For others, it will be new, but I think there will be something for everyone in the presentation today. Just by way of background on how we've arrived at this Farm Support and Development Programme, all began back in 2018 with engagement with a number of key stakeholders right across the industry. And that resulted in the publication of a stakeholder engagement document, the green document that you can see in the far left of the screen. Following further discussions with stakeholders, a set of policy proposals were published in a policy framework document in August 21, culminating then in a public consultation late December 21, early 22. And then in March 22, the Minister announced policy decisions for the future agricultural policy for Northern Ireland, which is being translated through this Farm Support and Development Programme. We published then the timeline for the rollout of new schemes and measures in June of this year, and we're now working towards meeting that timeline as best as we can. And I'll finish the presentation just to go through that timeline with you. In this slide here, we set out the vision that's been developed with industry for the future of the agricultural industry here in Northern Ireland. And there's 4 key themes. Firstly, an industry that pursues increased productivity. Secondly, an industry that has improved resilience. Thirdly, environmental sustainability and improved environmental sustainability. And then fourthly, operating in a responsive supply chain. So as a department, we want to see improvements in productivity in the industry. It's about making farm businesses more efficient, using resources more effectively, cutting costs and reducing inputs. This will help the industry to remain competitive with competition from across the globe. But to do this, we need to keep up to pace with the drive to improve productivity. Our new programme also aims to have a positive impact on the environment. Water quality, air quality, ammonia, biodiversity loss and soil health issues have to be addressed. Agriculture has been part of the issue, but moving forward it ultimately has to be part of the solution, and therefore that's why we have to start to look at positive ways for agriculture to evolve, building and investing in our environmental capital and creating the conditions for an economic return for on-farm environmental assets. We need to build increased resilience, both economic and environmental, into farm businesses. and business planning. Events across the globe will affect Northern Ireland, and we cannot predict these events, but we have to be ready to cope with them when they arise. How farm businesses can be built to cope with volatility and uncertainty, and how this is built into the business model will be a significant issue to address. And finally, we need a supply chain that is well connected and is responsive. And as we start to make progress, we can start to tell our story to customers about the journey the industry is on in terms of sustainable agriculture in Northern Ireland. These are the 4 long-term objectives for the industry that will be there for the next 15 to 20 years. But what then does this mean for farm businesses and landowners? It comes down to how they manage their land, what will be expected from them, and the support they will get for doing that. How farm businesses manage their livestock, for example, breeding and feeding. The types of investment farm businesses will make on their farm, and the support available to take them there. And finally, the skills and knowledge that farmers and landowners will develop for the new agenda going forward. There will be big changes, and there will also be a lot of support to help take farm businesses and landowners on this journey. The schemes that will help farm businesses on this journey are really a means to an end and will evolve over time. But what will remain constant will be how farm businesses manage their land, their livestock, the skills they have, and their infrastructure. Within the Farm Support and Development Programme, there are 8 main schemes listed on the slide there in front of you. So firstly, Farm Sustainability Payment. That will replace the Basic Payment Scheme. There will be a Beef Sustainability Package looking at improving the performance of the beef sector, both from a productivity point of view and also from an environmental point of view. There will be a Farming with Nature Package to replace the current environmental farming scheme. There will be a Farming for Carbon Package, an investment measure, a knowledge and innovation package, Farming for the Generations, which is really looking at how farms transition from one generation to the next and how we can support that. And finally, a supply chain package. There will also be a number of cross-cutting measures, which will include big data packages, providing data to help with farm business management. As Dermot had mentioned, the Soil Nutrient Health Scheme is already up and running and being rolled out across Northern Ireland. And that will be followed by the Ruminant Genetics Programme and the Carbon Benchmarking Programme. And I'll say a little bit more about all 3 later on. In addition to those cross-cutting data packages, there will also be controls and assurance to monitor and ensure their compliance with the new support regime going forward. And alongside that, there will be a new set of farm sustainability standards which will replace the current codes of good agricultural practice. There will also be a livestock dietary emissions reduction scheme, which I'll say a little bit more about later as well, monitoring evaluation, and from a Pacific Enterprise point of view, a horticulture measure. On monitoring and evaluation, we're putting in place measures to gauge the success of the overall programme, and really to ensure that that programme is driving the change that is necessary. If it's not, then we can go back and make changes to the schemes, to the measures, to ensure we get the change that is needed. So a fundamental work stream will be the monitoring and evaluation to demonstrate how, on an annual basis, we are meeting and delivering against the 4 main outcomes that I've mentioned already. As schemes come online, there will be a lot more detail available, and we'll be publishing this on our website and communicating it to the industry as well. One of the other important aspects of the Farm Support and Development Programme is addressing climate change. Again, Dermot alluded to the Climate Change Act, which now is in Northern Ireland, and commits emissions reduction targets to meet net zero by 2050. And within the Climate Change Act, we have to reduce our emissions to 48% lower than the baseline by 2030. And by 2050, greenhouse gas emissions, as everybody knows, needs to be at least 100% lower than the 1990 baseline year. Carbon budget targets are also set out in the Climate Change Act for different sectors to meet. And earlier this year, the Department consulted on the budgets advised for the first 3 Climate Action Plan periods by the Climate Change Committee. The Climate Change Act also requires the Department to publish every 5 years a Climate Action Plan, and the first of these Climate Action Plans covers the period 2023 to 2027. And within the Climate Action Plan, it will set out the policies and proposals from right across government to achieve the carbon budget for that Climate Action Plan period. When it comes to agriculture and the agricultural industry, within that Climate Action Plan, there are two main sectors that are of interest to farmers. Agriculture itself, and in law and by definition, is defined as emissions from livestock, agricultural soils, stationary combustion and off-road machinery. And emissions are affected by the number of livestock, the quantity of fertiliser applied to land, and the intensity of the farming activity. These are the emissions coming from agriculture that we will have to address to reduce the farm carbon budget, and which we're trying to take forward through our farm support and development programme, and more about that later. The other important sector to farmers is land use change and forestry. The land, the trees, the hedgerows that farmers have in their farm business. So by definition, land use change and forestry covers sinks and sources of emissions from land use change and forestry. Sinks remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere, while sources emit greenhouse gases. And emissions are affected by deforestation rates and land management practices. In terms of both these sectors and their emissions, you can see on the screen in 2021, agriculture emissions across the whole of Northern Ireland and across all sectors accounted for 28% of total greenhouse gas emissions. Land use change and forestry, 10%. You can see on the right-hand side, agriculture has been going up, and that just sets out the challenge for the industry going forward to bring those emissions down as we work towards the climate change target, the Climate Change Act targets. In terms of providing advice to Northern Ireland on how we can reach net zero, the Climate Change Committee in the UK has provided advice. And for agriculture, they have proposed a number of near-term actions to take us to 2030. And again, those near-term actions include widespread adoption of new and improved breeding, feeding and management practices to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and also reductions in livestock numbers. And as the department has considered that advice, we have looked at it from the point of view of the agricultural industry in Northern Ireland and how we provide food products, not just for the UK, but right across or outside of the UK as well. And in the assumption around livestock numbers, the climate change advice has been based on the potential for numbers to come down as consumption of meat products declines. We have considered this CCC advice, particularly for the first Climate Action Plan, 2023 to 27, and in the context of the future agricultural policy decisions and the Farm Support and Development Programme. And we have looked at the emissions reductions that can be achieved through the Farming for Carbon package in that programme. So in terms of Farming for Carbon actions, these are a range of measures that farmers can adopt to help farm businesses reduce their carbon footprint. And as a department, we will assist and incentivise farmers to change practices in order to reduce their carbon footprint and to bring forward policy interventions that will help farmers do that. And a lot of these are already built into the programme through those actions. The Farming for Carbon package will take us through the first carbon budget to 27, but we need to think beyond that. And a key element of that will be investing in science and new technologies to take the industry on the road to net zero. And a key consideration at this early stage is not to take action or decisions that we may potentially regret in the longer term, potentially and particularly as science moves on all the time. So the Farming for Carbon actions included in the package are listed on the slide. Firstly, reductions in the number of older beef cattle within the beef industry. And we're taking that forward through the beef sustainability package, looking at reducing the calving interval of suckler cows, the age at first calving for replacement heifers, and the age at slaughter of beef cattle. There's also an opportunity to do similar things within the dairy side, looking at replacement rate and the age at first calving of replacement heifer. And again, this is one sector that has been making good inroads to drive those ages down. And we want to continue to support the industry to do that through knowledge transfer from CAFRE and applied research. Other opportunities included within the Farming for Carbon actions includes looking at the potential of feed additives to reduce methane emissions from livestock, using feed additives and other dietary interventions. Also looking at how we can reduce the use of fertilisers with greater use of legumes and swards. And also then breeding and looking at genomics in terms of how we can encourage animals with lower carbon footprint and lower methane emissions. And finally, urease inhibitor fertilisers and biomethane from waste will again help in reducing the farm carbon footprint. On the opposite side, LULUCF, again a number of measures that are being taken forward. Afforestation, which our Forest Service colleagues are taking forward. Agroforestry through the Environmental Farming Scheme and will be built into Farming with Nature going forward. Peatland rewetting, looking at locking more carbon in the soil, and also then improving our hedgerows and planting more trees. And again, that can help increase the sequestration of carbon from the atmosphere. In taking forward and looking at the impact that the Farming for Carbon actions will have, we have engaged with ADAS and set out a number of scenarios that they have modelled for us through their scenario modelling tool. And as you can see in the slide, those actions for the agriculture sector that I've just listed deliver a 12.1% reduction in emissions by 2027, based on the scenarios we have modelled. Fertiliser measures, reducing the use of fertiliser, encouraging more legumes and herbs, bring a 2% reduction. Dietary measures account for a 6.4% reduction. Genetics for 0.3%, reducing the numbers of older non-breeding cattle, 3.4%, and increased slurry to biomethane for 0.3%. The one that stands out and delivering over half of that reduction is dietary measures, looking at methane-reducing feed additives and other dietary interventions to reduce our carbon footprint. This is why within the department we've been taking forward the development of a livestock dietary emissions challenge fund. For this, the department will be working with industry to look at how they can manipulate livestock diets to reduce methane using methane-suppressing feed additives, and also reducing phosphorus and ammonia by reducing the protein and phosphorus content of diets. If we can achieve this, we will start to address some of the environmental issues as well as having a positive impact on farm business costs. Now, Northern Ireland is not the only part of the UK who is looking at this type of work going forward, and our colleagues in DEFRA are currently investigating and bringing forward a project to look at methane-reducing feed additives. And the department plans to be involved in that project through the collaborative research arrangements that we have in place. Moving then to look at the three big data packages that I mentioned earlier. Firstly, the carbon benchmarking programme. So to help farmers understand their individual businesses, where their carbon emissions are coming from, the department will be funding a carbon benchmarking programme which will be industry-led. This will be linked into farm businesses that are part of the Farm Quality Assurance Scheme initially, but will then be rolled out to all farms. The programme will also include a knowledge transfer element in order to support farm businesses to apply mitigations to reduce their footprint. The information obtained from the carbon benchmark will set a farm-level baseline and will identify opportunities to reduce carbon. Participation in this programme going forward will be linked to the new farm sustainability payment. And the key message is that in order to meet our carbon reduction targets, it's important that all farm businesses engage in this programme. Otherwise, other businesses will have to pick up the slack. The Ruminant Genetics Programme is another industry-led initiative which aims to increase the annual rate of genetic gain in the ruminant livestock sectors. This programme, to be delivered through the industry company Sustainable Ruminant Genetics Limited, will drive productivity, resilience animal health and welfare, and environmental gains. DNA samples of animals will be taken, and genetic information will be fed back to farm businesses. Farmers will be required to provide data for this programme as an eligibility condition of future farm support. And this programme will also be supported by knowledge transfer and innovation to support businesses to adopt genetic improvement programmes. Through the programme, individual farm businesses will receive information on how they are performing and how they compare to their peers and the genetic worth of their individual animals. This information will be needed in order to make decisions, for example, on breeding or when taking into consideration methane emissions from the animal. The programme will also allow accurate parentage of the animal to be established from DNA, and farmers will be able to identify calf genetics, which again will help to improve breeding and decision making. The department will fund the genetic profile of the current breeding herd and the first drop of calves. Beyond this, the ongoing annual calf drop will be a conditionality of the farm sustainability payment. The third big data package, the Soil Nutrient Health Scheme, is already up and running, and this will provide farm businesses with baseline information on pH, major nutrients in their soil, and carbon both below and above ground. And this will provide the basis for starting to manage nutrients on the farm, resulting in better sustainability, better water quality, and help farm businesses start to cut costs as there will be a more improved understanding of where nutrients will be needed. As you know, rollout of the scheme has already begun, with the South West completed last year and this year in the South East. Next year we'll move into Zone 3 in the North West, followed by Zone 4 in the North East. And it's fair to say that participation in this scheme has been excellent to date, with 95% of fields sampled in the South East in Zone 1 last year, and applications received to date in the South West covering 92% of fields. In terms of what farmers will get from participation in this scheme, this slide shows an example of information that will be provided through the LiDAR aspect of the scheme. It shows the nutrients are and builds a picture of where there's a risk of runoff and the best place for buffer strips and provides key information on how to manage the land. And this will feed into Farming with Nature scheme when it is launched, and support will be available then to help farmers who've identified those areas to how they can tackle them from an environmental point of view. Associated with the Soil Nutrient Health Scheme is training, and a knowledge package has been developed by CAFRE and is available online at the minute. And so the results, once farmers receive them, they'll get help through this training to understand those results and to use the information to drive their business forward. Moving on then to look at some of the other schemes in the Farm Support and Development Programme. Firstly, the investment scheme. This scheme will support innovation and new technologies with a focus on driving uptake in the use of new technologies, better nutrient management, and reductions in greenhouse gases, ammonia, and nitrates emissions, improve water quality. We don't want farmers also to be buying things that they don't need, so a review of the Farm Business Improvement Scheme has been undertaken to see what areas we can improve on. And to help with scheme design, the team developing this programme are running a survey at the minute that's online, and I would encourage anyone available and who can access that survey to complete that and give us your feedback. On the environmental side, Farming with Nature will replace the Environmental Farming Scheme and will be a significant area of spend moving forward. We've set a number of principles for this scheme. Firstly, it will be at landscape scale, as we want to bring lots of land into the scheme. Applicants for Farming with Nature will not have to be in receipt of the Farm Sustainability Payment to be eligible to gain entry. And again, the aim there is to reach a wider audience and include both farmers and land managers. Participants in Farming with Nature, however, must participate in the Soil Nutrient Health Scheme and comply with the new farm sustainability standards. Applicants must have a minimum land area of 3 hectares, And on financial incentives being provided through the scheme, there will be a cap on the level of payment to be introduced, and that's still being worked through. Through Farming with Nature, there will be a move to a more outcome-based approach, describing the types of outcomes we want to achieve for the environment. And an appropriate time horizon will be considered. Currently, 5-year contracts are the norm through EFS, but we don't really see them as long enough to drive the change that we need within the environment. And so within Farming with Nature, we will look at longer-term contracts. Collaborative participation will be encouraged, and we want to see farm businesses and landowners working together to derive better outcomes at a bigger scale. The initial focus for Farming with Nature will be on the creation and restoration of habitats that are important to species diversity, and there are many challenges there. We'll also want to focus on water quality and air quality going forward as well. A key aspect will be robust monitoring and the evaluation of the improvements that Farming with Nature is delivering. So in terms of the broad elements of the scheme design, there will be a Farming with Nature agreement which will give participants access to a range of measures. The approach will be modular, so further modules can be added as the policy evolves. There will be components focused on more intensive lowland farming areas based on habitat assessment and improvement. And there will also be measures focused on designated priority habitat and high nature value areas for specific environmental issues. Payments will be made up of a number of components depending on the habitats, the actions taken and the results being achieved. So again, a more flexible approach to delivering payment through this scheme. This slide sets out a picture of what the package will look like. The Farm Nature package on the left will follow on from EFS wider and will focus more on the lowland, more intensive areas. It will be based on a biodiversity score, again using data to assess where the farm is at and how that score can then be improved with taking environmental actions on the farm. And farmers will be offered additional reward as they increase their score on an outcome-based approach. Technology will be used to score biodiversity. We want to use an app to assess the score on farm, and a farm risk assessment will also form part of this element. Farm Nature Plus follows on from EFS Higher and will be based around higher value habitats and protected areas. These will require approved conservation plans from applicants, and payments will be based on particular habitats on individual farms. The department again wants to have a more streamlined application process to make it easier for both farmers and land managers and administrators. And then thirdly is a Farm Nature Landscapes, which is a follow-on from the EFS group process. And the department will be looking for innovative ideas and proposals through a competitive process on how to manage habitats on a landscape area. And finally, the green box at the bottom, there's an actions fund. And this will provide funding for capital works which form part of the environmental schemes. Farm businesses and land managers will complete the work and receive payment outside of the annual payment cycle. And again, this will make the process more straightforward for both applicants and their administrators. The Farming for the Generation scheme focuses on the transfer of the farm business to the next generation and the challenges around this. The department wants to raise awareness and see farm businesses plan for this change. To do this, the department will support farm business owners to develop a succession plan and business plan, and will help and encourage and support capacity building of identified successors and help progress both knowledge and skills. But we don't want to forget the person who's standing down or standing back, so it's important to focus on them as well, and support will be provided for the person both coming into the business and also stepping back from the business. This is a fairly new approach we're taking, an holistic approach, and to test some of the concepts that are being planned, we plan to run a pilot of this programme next year. And the pilot will involve workshops for the whole family farm, which will start the thinking around succession planning with introduction to a mentor who can guide them through sensitive discussions. We'll also look at capacity training on leadership, leadership training for successors, based around those leaving college and entering the industry. Again, this will involve mentor support, but we also want to look wider and potentially provide opportunities for study outside of Northern Ireland to learn and develop from that experience. We also want to look at land mobility. There has been a scheme running. This will be absorbed into Farming for the Generations. And this is where there's a need to match people up who want to step back from agriculture and those who want to get into farming. And then we want to look at the support for the person who is stepping back. One example currently being delivered through rural support is Plough On, and this encourages and provides social interaction outside of the farm. But we know those farmers stepping back have a wealth of experience, and so there will be opportunities for those farmers to become involved in mentoring within the programme. The final scheme to mention is the knowledge and innovation actions. Running through all of the schemes and all of the programmes that we mentioned this morning is knowledge and acquiring new skills to uptake new technology or make the changes required within the farm business. And a number of principles have been set for our knowledge and innovation actions. Knowledge will be aligned with the department's policies. It will be evidence-based and informed by the evaluation of the current KT schemes that are being delivered through CAFRE. They'll focus on the delivery of the 4 outcomes for the industry that have been mentioned, and they'll be integrated within the other DARE programmes and schemes. All the good learning that we have taken and achieved through business development groups will be adopted going forward. So peer learning, the use of online technology, the use of demonstration farms will all be built into the new programme. And this slide shows the model that is being developed by CAFRE to deliver this programme going forward. At the bottom level, there's basic guidance, webinars, videos, press articles, and the like. And these will be very easy for farmers and landowners to access. The next scale is the larger training awareness events, similar to the antimicrobial training that has been rolled out in recent years. The next level moves into the business development groups arena, and again we want to evolve these to make them more flexible and live to current issues. Then, building on innovation, we'll have innovation visits to provide opportunities for farmers to travel outside of Northern Ireland to look at innovation and technologies that may be relevant to them and that they can bring back and discuss with their group. And then at the top of the pyramid is the innovation partnerships, farmers and researchers working together. And farmers will be able to dip in or dip out at different levels and at different points along the triangle. To conclude, the final slide shows the timeline that we published back in June and that we've rolled out to the industry. And we're now working to deliver on that timeline. And as you can see, while Soil Nutrient Health Scheme is up and running, next, the Sustainable Ruminant Genetics and Ruminant Genetics Programme work is starting there. And we hope to come shortly with our Farming for Carbon actions, particularly carbon benchmarking and the Livestock Dietary Emissions Challenge Fund. And you can see in the timeline the approximate dates for the rollout of other schemes. One of the things that's noted in the timeline is the phased introduction to the various interventions. And as those timelines come up and as the schemes come live, we will have further communications around that. All this information is available on our website, and a particular page is being created for the Farm Support and Development Programme. It is important, however, for farm businesses to be aware that over the next 5 to 10 years, there will be a change in how they manage their land and how they manage their livestock. The department will provide advice and help along the way, providing data and knowledge to get the best out of technology and provide support with the capital investments to be made on farm. This is a big change agenda. Work on the programme to date, as I've mentioned, has been carried out through co-design with our stakeholders. And as I mentioned earlier, we will have an opportunity now that if something's not working, we can go in quite quickly and make it change. It is a big change agenda for farmers, but we do encourage everyone to get on board, and together we can help drive forward a sustainable industry for the future. Thank you.
Question at the back.
So, am I right in saying what you were talking about in the landowners and the farmers for the tie-up of land? You're talking about, say, you're renting land as Conacre, that you want at least a minimum of a 5-year contract, but going forward, you would like that contract to be longer.
No, what I'm saying is the agreement that we will roll out to farmers who are in the Farm with Nature scheme. We want that agreement to be a longer period of time.
All right, okay. Oh, that's so it's not actually between the landowner and the land.
That's an individual arrangement still, yep.
Okay, no, that's fine. Thank you. Okay.
With one more at the back.
Hello. Your presentation was very good. I'd just like to ask a question about, you're talking there about improvements farmers will all have to improve. What about farmers that are low scale, aren't taking in any land, are currently involved in environmental schemes? Will they have to still improve, or will they be rewarded for what they have been doing down through the years?
Yeah, well, if you look at the Farming with Nature programme and that first module, the biodiversity score, so they will enter at a particular score. If they have been taking actions, when that biodiversity is assessed, it could be further up to 3 in terms of where the score's at, and that will bring further reward financially to the farmer. So the further up, the aim is the better the reward. So what they've done before will benefit them on that basis.
Yeah, I think that's what needs to be published more, is that people that are doing their bit won't be as much affected as people that haven't been doing as much.
Yeah. And certainly I think as we move, and you saw the timeline there, as we move to bring Farm with Nature out, there'll be a lot more communication around that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take one more question here at the front, and that's definitely it.
Hi, my name is Gary Thompson. I'm just finishing up a Nuffield scholarship looking at nutrient flows within dairy farming. And one of the things I've become aware of is that farmers in general they find the whole process overcomplicated and haven't really got a handle on nutrients coming on and off their farm. And in the Netherlands, they have a monitoring system or a nutrient accounting system whereby nutrients coming onto the farm feeding fertilizer are put into a nutrient account, and then it's the nutrients left the farm, i.e. the milk, or the animals left the farm through the farm movement system are accounted for, and farmers get a nutrient account. And farmers would then understand that the concentrate they buy is the phosphate they have, and they're not going out and purchasing fertilizer with phosphate in it, because they already understand they've got excess phosphate in the farm. Because I don't think they link the high P in their soils to the fact it's because they're overfeeding animals or they need to improve their milk from forage. So if we could just explain this to them in a simple context, it would help instead of overloading farmers with an awful lot of data. I would just like you to pass comment on that and what your thoughts would be on it. No,
interesting, and really, I mentioned the Livestock Dietary Emissions Fund. I suppose the initial part of that will be looking at how, on a test-based situation, what changes we can bring to diets by reducing phosphorus and protein in the diet, as well as the methane and reducing feed additives. But a key part then of taking that forward is rolling that out through knowledge to the industry going forward, and that'll be sort of fundamental and linked to what you're saying there. It'll bring it all back to the message to the farm gate.
Okay, thank you, George. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I can't possibly try and pull everything together that George has outlined for us. Suffice to say that for most of us, we're probably on the biggest change journey we have been on in our lifetime, in our generation. And I can probably liken it to COVID. The only difference is you got about 12 hours to get your head around how do you sort out a COVID problem. Whereas when it comes to environmental sustainability, we are learning as we go. That makes it a very difficult conversation at times. because I think everybody is at a different stage of understanding and a different stage of appreciation as to what exactly needs to be done. What I have heard George say is that stakeholder engagement is absolutely critical to the success of all of the policies and programs that George has outlined. There is a switch of language. There is a switch from production, i.e. how many tonnes, how many litres, to productivity, which is an efficiency measurement. It is all about driving environmental sustainability, which is for the environment, but it's for us. It's for us, the people. We're in the middle of this as well. And the point that probably isn't always understood is about building responsiveness and resilience in the supply chain. And I would say that is both from an environmental perspective and from an economic perspective. I think I hear DERA listening, and that is a compliment, lest anyone think it isn't. I think I hear them listening to farmers' concerns, to industry's concerns. I know that they're in the soil nutrient health scheme, and I'm going to connect the soil nutrient health scheme, the ruminant genetics scheme, and the carbon benchmarking programme. I know that there is a lot of work going on in the background to make the farm audits easier. There are conversations going on that says, how do we make it easier to capture the information on a farm, make it an easier day for the farmer and his family, and then have information that helps build credibility. That's an active conversation that's going on among the DERA team and across the industry. We have to get the data, we have to be able to share the data, and I know that there's always a certain amount of resistance to sharing data, but data is not information until it's assembled and shared. So therefore that is absolutely going to be essential. So I would say for those of you who are at what I would call the very heavy lifting stage of trying to assemble systems to assemble data, and I'm thinking particularly of the carbon benchmarking group here, stay at it. Because we need that information. For whom? To talk to our customers. Let's bring the customer into the room and have a conversation that says they're reflecting back onto us exactly the same pressure as we as an industry are feeling from an environmental perspective. They're not the bad guy. They're just simply reflecting onto us what we're feeling ourselves. But it's a huge translation exercise. We're all at a different stage. We all have different language. So I would just simply finish by encouraging farmers, encouraging farm organisations, encouraging farm advisors who have a brand new language to learn, encouraging the industry, and obviously encouraging us to share the information with customers and not see customers as the enemy as far as this conversation is concerned. So George, thank you very much. So at this stage, we are going to play the video. I'm looking at, that is a video where Ian Stevenson, our Chief Executive, has had an interview with Professor John Gilliland about the ARC0 project, and I'm sure there's going to be some very, very interesting facts revealed. So I've always wanted to say this, so just roll it there, Johnny.
So good morning. I'm delighted that Professor John Gilliland from Brook Hall Estate is able to join us for this year's Dairy Symposium to give us the latest updates on his important work with the ARC0 project, which really has caught the attention of industry and government representatives both locally and internationally. We know that sustainability is a continuous journey and that net zero in particular has become a core focus of legislation, market engagement, financing and indeed the future development of our agri-food industry. So John, you're very welcome to our symposium and thank you for taking the time to participate in this. So I suppose, first of all, can you tell me a little bit about the ARC0 programme and how you define net zero?
Well, ARC0 came together 4 years ago. Our sharing is a sharing of a journey that we're already well underway. It was a group of 7 farmers, including myself with my own farm. And really what we wanted to do is stick our heads up high and actually have a go of what does a journey to net zero look like. Our industry has been made a pariah in the national press and other places, and we felt unfairly. So we said, well, let's go and have a go and see how it works. And so ARC0, 7 of us came together. We're of different enterprises, so there's 2 dairy farmers, but there's also beef, sheep, arable, my own farm's dry stock with Willow. And we secured funding from the EIP Agri Operational Group and from the Northern Ireland Executive. And we've now come to the end of our first phase. And really what we want to do, more than anything else, is actually help us know our own numbers before we went any further. We wanted this journey to be of integrity. And really we focused on, well, if we're going to go on a journey, we need to know where we're starting from. Where are our actual emissions coming from? Where are our carbon stocks? How do we get emissions down? How do we get carbon stocks up? And that really started with us defining what is net zero. And what was very clear if we listened to the media, most of this, is that net zero was about zero emissions. And it's not. The UK legislation is very clear to 2050. Net zero is about bringing emissions down. It's also about building carbon removals. And our sector, being land-based, has soils, has trees, have hedges that actually build carbon. So it's about building carbon stocks as well. And then it's about displacing fossil fuels. So where can we put renewable energy in? And then ultimately, our animals produce a waste, and methane which comes from the waste. Is there something we can do with that waste as well? And when you get all four of those strands together, that is net zero. And what it isn't, it is not zero emissions. Because zero emissions mean not only will you have no animals, you have no humans either.
What do you think have been the main learnings in the programme so far?
Well, the main learnings we found is once we did our baselines and we actually found out what our numbers were. So what are our emissions and where are they from? What are our carbon stocks and how could we build more? How could we put renewables in? We all then started to change our behaviour. But we changed our behaviour from a position of knowledge. So we informed ourselves, because at the end of the day, people can tell us what to do, but if it doesn't suit with our culture, our business, our landscape, it's no good. We need to make the decision. So our focus was, if we empowered ourselves with better knowledge, would we make better quality decisions? And the answer is yes. So we went through, in 2021, we used a life cycle assessment calculator. The one we used was AgriCalc. And we came back in 2023 and we did it again. And the reason we did that is we wanted to see for ourselves, did we get behavioural change on our farms? And the answer was yes. The second thing we wanted to find out is, what is the net carbon position currently on these 7 farms? Because at the moment we're reported on gross emissions. That's all people talk about. Yet the legal definition is net zero, not gross zero. And what we found in the 7 farms is 2 of the farms were beyond net zero today. And that came as a shock, is actually when you do this and do this properly with forensic detail, with integrity, there are some farms beyond net zero today. And that really highlighted that some farms will find this journey quite easy, some farms will never get there at all. And it really allowed us to focus in that actually the target of net zero is for the sector, it's not for the individual farmers. And we just saying, well, how could we be creative, as we did in the old days of milk quotas, allow flexibility with farmers, is so that people can do the heavy lifting in carbon, encourage them to do it. The people who can't, they need to do their best, but where they're deficient, then they go to their neighbours who can do it and they get some of their carbon from it. And you create some kind of trading scheme. So the sector gets to net zero.
Yeah, and I suppose being a dairy symposium we're at today, do you think carbon neutral dairying farming is possible?
Of all the sectors out there, I think dairy is probably going to be one of the most hardest ones. And it's mainly because at the end of the day, dairy produce is so good for human health. And I continuously see to 2050 real good consumer demand for dairy products. Of all the things that we could consume, dairy produce is really at the top of that list. So I think there will always be a market demand for dairy. And the nature of dairy production, it is more intensive. So I do believe that dairy farmers need to do their best. Do I expect all of them to get to net zero? No, I don't. But I actually think other sectors can get to net zero and can go beyond. And this is about a circular carbon system within primary production. But key in that is making sure we have transparency and integrity in the journey we go on.
Yeah, and I suppose it brings us on to, the key role that farmers play in delivering multiple public goods. And I suppose, do you think in the first instance is that well enough understood, particularly around things like carbon sequestration, for example, which we see as a key issue in terms of our farming sector here in Northern Ireland?
So, no, I don't think it's widely understood. I think in our world of soundbite media, today we talk about carbon, tomorrow we talk about biodiversity, the next day we talk about water quality. And then all of us as farmers have to sit in front of the bank manager every year, and profitability. And actually, one of the key things when I present to the wider public is, for me, the breadth of the public good we produce as farmers. It starts as we produce highly nutritiously dense and diverse food, first and foremost. But then we look at how we improve our soil, how we build our carbon stocks, how we improve water quality, how we improve biodiversity. But also the other bit of public good that is completely demeaned wrongly is profit. Profit, farming, making profit is a public good because farmers spend money in the rural community. Take that profit element out and our rural fabric collapses. So that is a public good as well. And it's really important that we articulate that what the farming community do, whether they're dairy or any other sector, is they actually provide this basket of public goods. And we want them to deliver as many of those as possible, but in a just way. And the journey we're going towards net zero has to be in a just transition. Because if we don't get to the other end, and if you don't have farmers at the other end, how on earth as we as consumers are we going to live without nutritiously dense and diverse food?
How best do we encourage farmers to think about this as a win-win scenario?
So the journey we're on, it's really important that people understand there's a huge toolbox of a lot of different tools. And the first thing is finding out where you are and then having a look inside that toolbox. Which tool suits my farm? There are many tools in that toolbox will not suit my farm, but might suit my neighbour's farm. So we need to understand that. The second thing is we need to know the economics of using that tool. And what's surprising when you actually look at the economics, some of those tools actually have a negative cost. In other words, have a profit. So improving livestock genetics, absolutely stunning. Improving animal health. There's two quick wins, okay? Both of those have a negative cost that will actually reduce greenhouse gas emissions and improve profitability. If I go to the other side, the two I would use as an example of what I call win-losers, where we will improve our footprint, but there's a cost. So methane inhibitors, seen as very sexy at the moment. There's now products on the marketplace that can get a 30% reduction of methane, but they're expensive. And in the absence of the market or policy paying for carbon, I can't advise farmers to go to those at the moment until someone actually pays a farmer to do it. And the other example is actually fertilizer. I know one of the largest global producers of fertilizer will be bringing both blue and green fertilizer to the marketplace. I had the pleasure of being with them 2 weeks ago, and I asked, well, what's the price point? And their comment was, well, do you remember last year in the middle of the Ukraine war when fertilizer went to £1,000 a tonne? I said, yes, I remember. He said, about that point. And I said, well, the reality of it is, unless someone actually recognises that, farmers aren't going to do that, okay? So what I encourage and what we did with the 7 of us is we've gone into the toolbox and we've picked what we call the win-wins. So the likes of improving genetics, the likes of improving animal health, the likes of displacing nitrogen fertilizer with legumes. So really looking at more clover and grass, looking at multi-species swards, on the condition we get our soil pH right first. And so we looked at that total package, and the economics are fundamental because we need profitable farms at the end of this journey. And as someone who's gone through this and someone who currently advises on this, we cannot ask farmers to do things that have a cost to them. We can encourage them at the moment, in the absence of carbon being priced for farmers, then we still have things that we can do today. And certainly on all 7 farms, we got behavioural change.
I suppose thinking in terms of the policy agenda here in Northern Ireland, what's your assessment of the current sort of carbon budgets in place? Do you think they're realistic in terms of farmers being able to I suppose, deliver those targets, or what further support or incentives do you think that, I suppose, maybe aren't in the pipeline that maybe need to be considered? Thinking around things like, GWP star, for example, in terms of how some of these emissions are actually counted.
So my frustration at the moment is the speed to which the climate change legislation came through. Is our science is getting better every year. Both the science of what our emissions are, how it's impacting, but also particularly around methane. For 5 years now, Professor Miles Allen at Oxford University has said, hold on, IPCC, United Nations, methane is not a long-lived gas. So nitrous oxide and CO2 are the other two key gases. Both of them live for over 100 years in the atmosphere. GWP star has a half-life about 10 to 12 years. And currently, all the methodologies that legislation is built upon, our targets are built upon, is around methane living for 100 years. And that's not correct. Now, United Nations have recognized this 2 years ago in my publication. It was further recognized in September of this year when the FAO, which is an agency of the United Nations, particularly brought out a paper around agriculture, methane and rice production, where they clearly highlighted that our methane, first of all, is biogenic. It's not fossil fuel, so it doesn't last for as long. But clearly also indicated that we needed to use multiple metrics. And for methane on farm, this concept of GWP star that Miles Allen has floated is actually something we need to look at. And so the recommendation from them and from a recently published paper of 9 of the top UK agricultural climate change scientists is that until IPCC make a definitive ruling, is that we actually should report using both methodologies. So back in August time, I worked with AgriCalc, who are the people who did our calculations, and we have back calculated for the 7 ARC0 farms to see what would be the impact on our 7 farms if GWP star was used. And surprise, surprise, it actually creates a big impact. And when I add in carbon sequestration, so when we did ARC0, when we added carbon sequestration in, although I do caveat it's to tier 1, so it's not overly accurate, we got somewhere around a 28% improvement of the dairy farm's position. When we added in GWP star, we got a further 22% improvement that we found our 2 dairy farms out of the 7 farms ended up, if you brought in carbon sequestration and you brought in GWP star, both legitimate things to bring in, that these 2 dairy farms were already 50% there today. Before then, they looked at better genetics. Before they looked at nitrogen displacement. And so, going back to the targets, I think the key overall target in the United Kingdom is the net zero by 2050. At a Northern Ireland level, I think our legislation and targets will be continuously refined as the science gets better. And so I am maybe less concerned than others where the targets are today, because I see what's in the science pipeline. There are a lot of politics around this. The big politic in GWP star, it really depends on your size of your national herd, and over the last 20 years, is it getting bigger, is it getting smaller? And in the United Kingdom, we're getting smaller. In fact, most of the European countries were getting smaller. And that makes our GWP star consequence more favourable. But if we go to the developing world, and the developing world have a huge malnutrition problem of people, and they need more livestock products in their diet to give better nutrition to people, and they're on a rising plane. The developing world needs a help, and they actually need some of the science in the developed world to help the developing world, rather than hiding behind a political fudge where we are using inaccurate science to how we report methane. Once we get all those politics sorted out, I do believe that we will have to revisit the targets in Northern Ireland. Because it's really important, if this journey is to have credibility and integrity, if we stop using science to inform it and we use emotion, well then we're in a banana republic. You know, we absolutely, and I learned from my days as president of the Ulster Farmers Union, right through foot and mouth and things like that, what does the science say? Now, science will always continue to get better, but you need to make the best educated judgment on the day. Okay, when the targets came through last year, they made an educated judgment. I just think the science is going to beat them, and they're going to have to revisit the targets in Northern Ireland.
When you look at some of the very contentious proposals that we see, certainly in discussion fora in different countries at the moment around things like, you know, reduction in livestock numbers as a possible solution to meeting targets, things like taxation of meat and milk to maybe try and cut down sort of production or consumption, you know, what do you see as the outlook for the future level, for example, of dairying in Northern Ireland, which I suppose is key for us, you know, in terms of, you know, we don't want to see those such draconian measures coming into effect in a region like ours?
Well, I think it's really important that organisations like the Dairy Council, like the Ulster Farmers Union, continue to put in front of policymakers the emerging evidence as such. What is going on in other countries, and one not too far from here, and the call for maybe a cull of 200,000 dairy cows next year, is they have looked at a very draconian way of analysing where IPCC and the Greenhouse Gas National Inventory is. And so the Greenhouse Gas National Inventory, all countries have to report to the United Nations on an annual basis against it. It's a spreadsheet. It's a spreadsheet of vertical silos. And we as farmers, dynamic farmers, could find that we are doing activity within our same business in 3 or 4 different vertical silos. So what do I mean? At the moment, well, we have the agriculture, forestry and land management sector. And in that, methane belch from cows sits within it. Nitrous oxide from wet soils sits within it. Sitting next door to it in the land use change and forestry is carbon stocks and the increasing of carbon stocks or the loss of carbon stocks. But it sits in the next silo. If I go a couple more silos across, waste management. So if I'm actually catching some of the methane giving off from my manures and doing something constructive with it, it sits over in waste. And then if I actually then go and do some renewable energy, that sits under the energy. And at the moment, a farm business is not allowed an inset, where you can inset the unavoidable emissions coming from the cow with the positives of building carbon stocks, with the positives of displacing of energy with renewables. And so when I presented the United Nations back in August this year and September last year, is I've made it very clear we need an additional mechanism to the greenhouse gas inventory to recognise the breadth of the activities that farming businesses do so that we can actually inset. Because at the end of the day, what we need farmers to do, yes, we need to bring our emissions down. Yes, we have to build our carbon stocks. Yes, we have to incorporate renewables. Yes, we have to look at waste management. But where you only take one silo, you get a perverse outcome. And the countries that are currently looking for culls of animals are where they are only looking at one silo. And they're completely missing the functionality of farming, is we deliver multiple public goods. So right at the start, we said that. And so we need to create a mechanism that recognises we want farmers unshackled, that they actually deliver all of these things and they get recognised within their business. I do think that will come. We still got a long way to go. Milk processors have to report against Scope 3 emission declarations. Now that is separate from the greenhouse gas inventory. So that's run by the United Nations. Scope 3 emission declarations are run by the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which is set up by the private sector to show responsibility of the journey. At the moment, the clue is in the title, Scope 3 emission declarations. So one of the key proposals I am suggesting is that Scope 3 net carbon declarations. Now that is transformational for dairy farmers because it allows them to bring in these other issues. I am being told you can't have that. Well, I do know that the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, they themselves recognise that the land-based and food production sector can remove carbon. They currently have an ongoing review that is to report back by the second quarter of 2024 about how do we bring land-based removals from the food production chain into Scope 3 emissions. And we need to be putting all the pressure we can on to make sure that's a positive report and that is embedded within Scope 3, and that our Scope 3 declarations for milk processors are actually on a net carbon basis and not on a gross emission basis. And that will be transformational. On top of that then, will they then look at the role that GWP star plays in Scope 3? Because again, at the moment, it's not on the agenda. And so from an industry point of view, those are two things we have to win. And we shouldn't be ashamed to ask for them, because actually that's what the science says. So this isn't about emotion. This is about equity to food producers, dairy farmers, that yes, we do have to face our responsibilities, but just make sure it's a journey of integrity.
Where do you see Arc Zero going next in terms of the next sort of part of this journey, in terms of how you envisage the journey for those 7 farms that have made such good progress so far, including your own?
Well, first of all, Arc Zero could not have been the success it is without the other 6 farmers. I'm indebted to them. And there are times I know I've pushed them out of their comfort zone and they would have loved to kick me. But the fact we've got through to the end of the first phase, and at the closeout conference, the fact all of them were very public and willing to participate in that and speak their mind. And the one thing, you will never control the other 6. They will speak their mind, and all of them want to continue. Our EIP Agri and Northern Ireland Executive money has come to an end. We have formed a community interest company because actually we want to continue. We're sort of a third of the way up the mountain. Now we have 2 choices. We either get more funding and we keep going and we get to the top of that mountain, or we come back down the mountain with the tail between our legs. Now, if you know any of the 7 of us, we're not quitters and we're not ready to quit. So what we put in place is a proper governance. So it's a community interest company. It allows us both to apply for public funds and philanthropic funds. And I'm glad to say that the Co-op Foundation of the United Kingdom has just come in behind us and given us our next tranche of funding. But we've also reached out beyond Northern Ireland, and we have participated in a very large bid through Wagram University in Research to the EU Commission's call on living labs. Because really what Arc Zero is, it's a living lab of 7 farms where we're pushing the boundaries of behavioural change. And we would like to see then that replicated across other countries in Europe. But we also would like to see a collection of lighthouse farms then that take our knowledge and actually become beacons for change wider out in the farming community. Because you know something, nothing is better than peer-to-peer learning. Farmers are curious, but you know something, their curiosity is well satisfied. A farm walk is better than a lecture. And we had the pleasure over the last 3 years of having 7 fantastic farm walks. The feedback we got was stunning. And I remember one comment, but it was great to be hosted by someone who was walking the walk and not talking the talk. And and that was the feedback I got from each farm visit. Is all 7 of us were coming from different backgrounds, different starting points. We're all on a journey, and some things we've done haven't worked, okay? But some things are really crazy, and I think probably the most craziest thing is actually what's happening on my farm. Is a lot of people know I grow willows for renewable heat. Well, someone told us that a willow leaf was full of condensed tannins, and condensed tannins are one of the best natural methane inhibitors. So actually we did a project with Queen's University Belfast and with AFBI, and we actually put a herd of cattle into our field. And lo and behold, we got a 28% reduction per kilo of live weight gain, supported by Foil Meats, the Foil Food Group, because we couldn't milk, but we could graze. And as a consequence, it really has opened our eyes up. There are a lot more tools in this toolbox than we initially thought, and a lot of them are biological. And just the one thing I leave you on, I always believe that the 20th century was the century of chemistry. For me, the 21st century will be the century of biology. And the more biological solutions we can get. I was astonished in my previous role as Director of Agriculture in Devonish, in the farm in Douth. we were able to get a 30% increase in dry matter yield. We were able to get a 70% increase in live weight gain and a 90% reduction in nitrogen fertilizer just by switching from a monoculture of perennial ryegrass onto multi-species swards, regardless of their limitations. That's biology for you. And I think the real trick in that was when we did the agri-calc of that, we got a 28% reduction per kilo of live weight gain. Fantastic. But we also at the same time had a 300% increase in earthworm populations. And the real trick with livestock production is actually now highlighting the role that livestock feces plays in soil. And on my own project, on my own farm, we had a Vagler master's student for 4 months this year. And we analysed, I have 5 different land uses, and we analysed all the biology in the soil across the land uses. And there was a clear winner. And we came to earthworm counts, when we came to soil respiration rates, when we came to bacterial fungi communities. The clear winner was anywhere where I had feces being defecated by an animal. And anywhere I didn't, so in my trees, I had nothing. My soil biology had collapsed. And so really brought home the circular role that ruminants play, whether it's milk production, whether it's beef or lamb production, the role they play of taking poor quality roughage that you and I can't eat, turning into highly nutritious milk and meat, and driving the soil biological system. Remember, 60% of the world's biodiversity is under the soil. It's not above the soil. And a ruminant and what is in their feces is absolutely gold dust for driving soil biology. And it's something that nobody ever tells about. And it's something that certainly we need to spend a lot more money in research to complete the circular role that ruminants play for society.
Ladies and gentlemen, I always find it, I hope you find it very, very calming to hear somebody who is as far on the journey as Professor John Gilliland is on, and who can speak with such fluency on things that probably worry the rest of us simply because we don't know. A couple of things just to try and tie the last 2 presentations together. I still have the soil nutrient health scheme, the ruminant genetics and the carbon benchmarking running through my head. And some of the key messages that aligned with that in the last presentation were, let's use science-based targets. And there's science-based targets and judgments, because they're not absolutely perfect. It's not net zero. He says it is not zero emissions. That's an important message, because I think farmers and our industry know that we won't get to zero, even though the language says zero. But there is a metric and a measure that we have yet to learn about here, that in this case zero doesn't mean zero. We have to measure, we have to know where we started, we have to know whether we have improved, and we certainly need to know when we get there. I heard one size doesn't fit all. Whether you're a farmer or whether you're in industry, there are multiple ways of trying to get to the same solution. And I am very encouraged to be in the dairy industry, because while it's acknowledged that it's intensive, we play a very, very important role. We play a very, very important role in the rural community and the whole social aspect of what goes on within our communities. We produce a very nutritious product, and the world needs nutrition. It's a different thing than the world needs food. The world needs nutrition. And we do have to contribute to culture and lifestyle. So this is not just simply about emissions. There are some quick wins, and 2 of the quick wins were in genetic improvement and animal health. I can't remember the language he used, but to me, they don't cost anything. And they were very quick wins, and that is a common practice that has been taught down through the years. Some of the other measures are new, and we're going to have to learn them. We're going to need science, particularly biology, and we're going to need technology, but please accept that both change. They're not fixed. Methane, I love the way he sidestepped the methane conversation. He didn't say measure A or B. He says we'll measure A and B. So therefore, let's look at it both ways until we decide how the science sorts out. and let's not have a silo mindset. So there's new evidence coming on the table, but don't use that as an excuse not to engage. I think I heard that message coming through very, very clearly. I think I heard a balance sheet, and a balance sheet is that on any farm there's a plus and a minus, where farmers and industry will emit on one side, but we consume on another side, and we know that that can be a touchy conversation. And I'm going to finish off with knowledge transfer, which I heard coming left, right and centre. We have to share the information, we have to share it peer to peer, and we have to share it farmer to farmer. So by and large, I think I'm going to stop there. I found that a fantastic video, and I found an awful lot of information there. So now I'm going to call on our next speaker, and our next speaker is an Olympian. He's a national hockey player. His name is Dr. Jonathan Bell, and he is the head of Land and Sea Policy at the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds. And I'd like to call him to the stage, please.
So thank you for the introduction. I think the last time I spoke at a Dairy Council event, I was actually extolling the virtues of dairy products and milk for athletes. So here in a different guise today. Thank you firstly to Ian and his team for the opportunity to come here today to showcase this collaborative work that we've been undertaking with the Dairy Council over about the last year or so. I'm head of Land and Sea Policy at the RSPB in Northern Ireland. My remit covers a range of land use policy issues as well as our marine work, and I have a team of policy officers who work with me on that. And we also have an extensive operations team that work out on the ground with many conservation advisors, and we work with about 500 farmers across Northern Ireland on a range of different priority landscapes across Northern Ireland. And we have a really good relationship with those farmers. I suppose for people in the room today, they might perceive those people and farmers that we would work with maybe as more in the marginal landscapes and not maybe on the more intensive land. I suppose that's a key reason why we wanted to engage in this project, to work with the dairy sector to look at how we can do more for nature on our more intensively farmed land. Just as a bit of context, we know that we are in a nature and a climate crisis, and the nature and the climate crisis are ultimately two sides of the same coin, and we can't tackle one without tackling the other. And John Gilliland mentioned it there. Carbon stores on farms, natural habitats are key carbon stores. With over 70% of our land in Northern Ireland managed for agriculture and farming, there's a critical opportunity here to embed nature across our farmed landscape, and in doing that, that can act as a nature-based solution to climate change and help us to capture more carbon. And we really feel that nature and climate-friendly farming is going to be a key part of the solution to the climate and the nature crisis. Just, I suppose, some sobering statistics to start off with. The State of Nature report was recently launched in the last month or two, and a couple of the statistics, so 17 farmland bird species have on average fallen by 43% across Northern Ireland since 1996. Woodland birds have also declined by about 18% over the last decade, and since 1988, wintering water bird numbers have declined by 30%, and many more of our species are now on the sort of the red listed category. And I pick out some of the bird statistics there because birds are a great indicator of the health of our ecosystems. And it's not just farming that has led to global biodiversity decline, but we've experienced habitat losses from a range of different pressures, from climate change, from conversion of land for urban expansion and intensive management, increased human disturbance, invasive species and diseases. But then in relation to farming, I suppose the reduction in mixed farming, increased and improved grassland coverage, pressures from increasing livestock density, higher levels of ammonia, and also coniferous plantations that very much affect our wader birds. At that global level, the Global Biodiversity Framework, to which the UK is a signatory, the Leaders' Pledge for Nature, which is signed by about 85 countries, has set out a commitment to protect 30% of our land and seas for nature by 2030 in order to halt and then reverse biodiversity loss. And in the most recent Global Biodiversity Framework, a couple of snippets taken from the text that state that we need to take urgent action to halt and reverse biodiversity loss, to put nature on a path to recovery for the benefit of people and the planet. And there's a lot of targets set out in that Global Biodiversity Framework, and member states are then required to go away and integrate those targets within their own plans, policies and programmes. And just one of the targets, target number 10, that relates to agriculture, talks about ensuring that areas under agriculture, aquaculture, fisheries and forestry are managed sustainably, in particular through the sustainable use of biodiversity, including through a substantial increase of the application of biodiversity-friendly practices. And just a little sort of visual illustration of where we need to go in order to achieve not only net zero, but a net zero nature positive world or economy. And this graph kind of depicts, I suppose, around where we are, 2023, 2025, that we are at a low point. We have a pretty low baseline in terms of the amount of biodiversity that we have left. But this graph illustrates where we need to go over the next 20, 30 years, as I say, in order to achieve that net zero nature positive economy. So that just sets a bit of context as to why we embarked on this project with the Dairy Council. And I suppose the purpose of the project, we recognise that there's a growing interest in this area from the industry. Many reasons for that: pressures from lenders, pressures from consumers and customers, a moral desire to do more, as well as obviously the policy drivers from within government. And through the project, we wanted to understand some of the good that farmers are already doing, because don't get me wrong, it's not just a bleak picture. There are farmers doing great stuff for nature in Northern Ireland. So we wanted to look at what good was being done and how could we expand and scale that up. We wanted to share best practice about some of the nature positive options that farmers could take on their farms. Wanted to get some feedback from industry and farmers, sort of to reality check what we were coming up with, and recommend then options to expand nature positive farming in Northern Ireland. And it ultimately culminated in this report. And the report has been co-designed, and very much at RSPB, we didn't want it to be a case of, here's us telling you what to do. That's not the way to do things. We wanted this to be industry owned, co-designed, to generate that ownership from within the industry and within producers. We wanted to identify some exemplars of best practice, so some of the good things that are being done. And we also then undertook on-farm habitat assessments from 5 dairy farms across Northern Ireland. We had a couple of focus groups with farmers, as I say, to reality check our findings. And we have this final guidance document then that we hope will be of practical use to farmers and the advisors within industry. So, in terms of this report itself, there are 2 main sections to it. At the back end, we have set out a menu of 23 different options that farmers can deliver on their land to try and deliver a more nature-positive farming future. And many of these interventions don't impact on the farm business negatively. If anything, they probably improve the farm business. So just some example of some of the quick wins that were identified. So better field boundaries, in terms of the condition and extent of hedgerows, maintaining and enhancing any existing habitats and natural habitats on the farm, such as semi-natural grassland or meadows, herbal lays and legume-rich grasslands and multi-species swards, flower and seed-rich habitats at field margins and corners, and then any wet features like ponds and scrapes that could be incorporated on the farm. The second part of this report then reflects 5 on-farm habitat assessments that were undertaken on 5 different farms spread across Northern Ireland. Overall, there was about just under 500 hectares of land surveyed, and the farms were selected to reflect the breadth of dairy systems that we have, so fully housed, partially grazed and 7-month grazing systems, with the milk output varying between sort of 6,500 to 11,000 litres. And the farms varied in size from 50 hectares right up to 175 hectares. So I'm not going to go through in a huge amount of detail the findings, but I just want to give a brief sort of synopsis. So the first part of this exercise was to do a baseline on the farms. What is there at the minute? And I suppose some of the key takeaways. So there's a lot of existing good, but potential to do more. All farms had hedgerows and trees. So there's about 61 kilometres of hedgerows across the farms. One farm had really mature and diverse hedgerows. The other farms, maybe the hedgerows weren't as in good condition. Most of the farms had some form of wet feature, and a number of herbal ley trials and pilots had begun on 2 of the farms. And one farm out of interest had wintering waterfowl and waders. So the next stage was then to look at, okay, what are the options for change on each of these farms? Well, headline was, there's lots of quick wins with the right mindset. 50% of the hedgerows on the farms were deemed to be overmanaged, sort of rectangular boxes that weren't necessarily that diverse. And there was an opportunity to increase hedgerow cover of linear hedgerow habitat on the farms by about 30%. In terms of woodland, there were many opportunities for tree planting, including within the field boundaries, so interspersed within the hedgerows. Agroforestry is a potential option, and one farmer is very interested in looking at that. And again, across the farms, there was an opportunity to expand woodlands by about 30%. In terms of wet features, things like ponds or constructed wetlands to filter farm runoff. There was a potential to increase that across the farms from 1 to about 11. And again, in terms of native meadows, there was an opportunity across the farms to incorporate about 13 hectares of native meadows. So just in terms of wrapping up with a few conclusions and sort of future next steps, this guide is currently voluntary, so there's no requirement on farmers to actually do it. What we need is a really robust and well-funded agri-environment programme that provides options for dairy farmers. And we want to see nature become a profit centre on dairy farms. So it's no longer just a nice thing to do, but we need payment rates that adequately incentivise these conservation actions. Sorry, I'll flick on you. And then in terms of sort of that piece around business and conservation advice, we feel that's critically important. And at the minute, there's a bit of a disparity. Within the environmental sector, I would recognise that maybe some of our farm advice is overly conservation focused, maybe doesn't take account of farm profits or the farm business enough, and that's something we need to do more of. But at the same time, is that business advice overly profit focused, overly efficiency and production focused? And is there an opportunity for us to marry the advice? Because the farmers we work with really value the advice. Somebody out on the farm walking around with them, rather than it being on an app or some difficult way of doing it, actually having a human out there who has some expertise, not only about the farm business, but about conservation, is really, really valuable. And then just finally, around industry leadership, we want to see biodiversity on farms becoming more than just a nice thing to do or a nice side of desk thing. We want it to be a core profit centre on farms. We would like to see biodiversity audits conducted alongside carbon audits with some biodiversity action plans for every farm. And we would love to get to the point where we can see the milk price and payment rates incentivising nature-friendly milk and nature-friendly dairy products, and that's where we would like to get to. And just to flag before I finish, the Fair to Nature standard is something the RSPB has been working on, an industry accreditation scheme around nature-friendly produce, so that's something you might hear a little bit more about in the future. And just finally, I'd like to pass on my thanks to a number of people who were on the steering group of this project, so Mike Johnson for his leadership, and latterly to Ian Stevenson, to Neville Graham, and to David Stewart and David Chestnut. We had some really frank conversations during the project, and I really liked the sort of direct talking that we had. But ultimately, there's more that unites us as conservationists and farmers than there is that divides us. And all too often, we're talking about the dividing lines, about climate, about where we sit, about where they sit. No, we're all in this together, and we all, the farmers we worked with in this project, I mean, they're passionate about nature. They talk passionately about nature. They talk about their connection with the land, their connection with the natural environment and the species that they find on their land. So there is that connection there. But I suppose all too often farmers are maybe being driven in a certain direction by policy. And we need to support farmers on the journey. And it is a change journey, as you've mentioned.
Jonathan, thank you very, very much for that. And I think the giveaway was in the title, which I failed to read out, is nature positive dairy farming, which I think is, Jonathan has clearly outlined, as something that everybody can do and everybody can do more of, and that the presentation is based on that partnership between the RSPB and the Dairy Council. A couple of sound bites that did it for me was that birds are an indicator of environmental health and ecosystems. Biodiversity is an indicator. Sometimes we get stuck on the bird, but that's an indicator of something else. And sometimes we have to think a little beyond what's actually in front of us. But biodiversity is an indicator of healthy ecosystems. First hint that we're overmanaging. We're overmanaging probably grasslands. We're overmanaging hedgerows, an opportunity to expand woodlands, water features, and my goodness, there's no shortage of water this year. Might be an opportunity rather than a problem. And nature can become a profit centre. Now that's very interesting, but I have no doubt, George, that was aimed at you. All right? So now I think, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to call the farmer panel into place. And let's hear what farmers are doing from a practical perspective on their own farms. And I'm going to call on Mark Billock, John Oliver and David Thompson to come forward, please. And I'm going to hand the mic over to Ian. Thank you.
Okay, gents, thanks very much for joining us on the stage. And as I say, hopefully you haven't been too bamboozled by everything that you've been hearing today. But I think there's been a lot of very important sort of conversations, I suppose, that can be had on the basis of what we've heard. So I suppose, first of all, just by way of introductions, I might ask each of you just to give a wee bit of an overview of your respective farms, and I suppose if there's any particular points of focus that you think from a sustainability point of view that you've been focusing on your business over the last 12 months, just in terms of, I suppose, maybe some of the opportunities that you've seen and maybe some of the challenges around that. So maybe start off with Mark. You're beside me here. Just a wee quick introduction about your farm.
Hello there. My name is Mark Blelick from Aldergrove. We milk 150 cows 3 times a day on a high-input forage-based system. I suppose over the past 12 months, in light of poor milk prices, we've been more than ever focusing on efficiencies and reducing waste and energy consumption. We've installed a 50 kilowatt solar panel system, and we have just, as we speak, we're installing a heat recovery system to give us free hot water every day of the year. We grew homegrown cereals to reduce our stocking rate and utilise all our slurry.
So quite a basket of measures you've been trying to undertake to really, I suppose, take forward your farm, and we might come back to, I suppose, look at some of the key issues. John Oliver, maybe ask you just to give a quick overview from your perspective.
Name is John Oliver, farm an upland situation just outside of Limavady. The core farm business is 120 spring block calving cows. They'll be dried off now for around a month at Christmas time, and we follow very hard to hit targets for key performance. With regards to sustainability, I take a very proactive thought to sustainability in the farm, and I rank profit, cash flow, environmental impact, labour, infrastructure all equally. When there's too much pressure put onto one arm of that sustainability web, it's detrimental to other aspects of it. On the farm, we have a hydro turbine, solar panels. We produce around 3/4 of the energy needs of the farm, and almost 50% of the land farmed is unimproved upland, so we farm it in a regenerative style. It's the buzzword now, but we've been at it for nearly 100 years. In the last 12 months of that web of sustainability that I talked about, it was actually cash flow that I had projected this time last year to be the major issue. And so, again, we take a proactive approach to sustainability on our farm and made arrangements with the bank prior to any cash flow issues, and that's how we've managed to be sustainable through this year. And next year will, hopefully with an improved milk price, cash will not be the pressure, and perhaps we will take more of a look at the environmental impact or the labour impact.
Thanks for that, John. And last but not least, David, if you want to introduce yourself and tell us a wee bit about your farm.
Okay. Good afternoon, folks. David Thompson. I farm just in Sion Mills, just outside Strabane. We farm around 200 acres, milking around 140 cows. Like John, we're on a spring calving system. I'm trying to take as much from forage as possible. I suppose what Ian, you're asking about sustainability in the last 12 months. I suppose the key is profitability. So a lot of the things that I'm doing on the farm, I always have to make sure, is it profitable in terms of can the farm sustain it? And also looking at labour efficiencies and also looking at environmental things. This last 12 months in terms of sustainability on my forage side of things, I've put a lot of focus on my laneways. And because of that, I was able to get probably another month's worth of grazing this year, even given the difficult weather conditions that we had. So that's allowed me then to reduce my concentrate inputs, but still deliver similar milk yields. Other things there, what I'm starting to look into, I suppose what Johnny was saying about creating a wetland in the area. So I would have an area that would naturally, a lot of the water from the farmyard would flow down towards in the farm. And I just see it as a natural area for me to create a wetland area. So that's on the cards there at the minute as well. And then as well, with the Beacon Farm project, we put a field in of red clover. So that's in its early stages, and I suppose we'll see how it goes. Maybe we only got one crop of silage from it this year. But it's because it's in its early stages. I can't really comment on it, but I am starting to look more into, and also tried a bit of white clover as well. But I think the key in getting all that going forward will be getting my soils right. So we're always on nearly every 2 years going and testing soils just to make sure to see where we're at with our P's and K's and our pHs.
Thanks for that, David. And I suppose even just that, by way of that quick introduction from the three farmers, I think you can see just how much, that everybody's looking at every aspect of their business. But I suppose maybe, John, I'll come to you just on I suppose today's symposium's really been focused around the whole theme of data and action. From your own business perspective, how important do you find the collection and use of data, I suppose, in shaping your farm business? I know you talked about cash flow. That's obviously a key part of data as well. But just in terms of the data and use of data to help inform what you do on your farm?
Well, first and foremost, I run a dairy business, so data is very important, because without data I have no idea where I am. On our own farm, we focus very much on grabbing the low-hanging fruit, the likes of cow fertility, replacement rates, number of cows with sore feet, soil analysis, things that are data that is cheap and easy to collect. Quite often it's done with a biro pen and a piece of paper. And I find these are very easy to interpret. I can ring up, I can give Niall McCarran a ring there at Lakeland, and he can help out with the interpretation of a lot of the data, or my local CAFRE advisor. And that's the low-hanging fruit, and that gets me a good return on that data. Then we move on to marginal data, where it's more difficult to collect, it's more expensive to collect, it's more difficult to interpret, and provides much less of a return. And almost feel like on the farm at the moment we are gathering too much data and getting very little reward back out of the efforts of collecting it. I think going forward, it will be my aim to put twice the focus onto half the data collected, as opposed to collecting twice the data.
And I think that's a key point in terms of, there's no point in collecting information if we're not using it, constructively within the business. Mark, I might come to yourself. I suppose we've heard today, I suppose, a lot about the changing landscape around agricultural environmental policy and a lot of the cross-cutting programs on carbon, soils, genetics. I think that is focused right throughout today's program. Do you think are any of those programs that that I suppose from your own perspective you're particularly looking forward to participating in when they become available? Maybe you've already done some in terms of carbon. Do those programs, I suppose, excite in terms of the development of your business, and how do you see that going forward?
Yeah, well, we're currently doing a lot of those things. We soil sample our farm every 3 years. We soil sample cereal ground every year. We're genomically testing, capture data, as John mentioned. So they're all kind of linked together, and they're all useful together equally as a chain, as opposed to one being more beneficial than the other, I think.
I think that's, I suppose, again, a key message, how these things all knit together to create a package. David, maybe I'll come to you on this one. A core focus of sustainability, I suppose, is often on the environment, but we know that has to go hand in hand with the economic and the social aspect of farming. Do you think there's enough attention being given to the work-life balance on dairy farms, and does your system allow you sufficient downtime?
I suppose we put this into context when I sort of went home to farm, was it maybe 12, 13 years ago? So I came I went back to the home farm as such, and it would have been farming with my cousin, but we always had a goal to say, right, we're going to split the farm at some stage. And an opportunity came up there about 5, 6 years ago, and we took that opportunity, but it was myself that was moving on to the new farm. And one of the key focuses of that when I moved was going to be my work-life balance. I knew it was kind of, when I was setting up the farm, the focus was, it's only going to be me. Yes, my father might be there to give me a hand, but I had to sort of set it up based on that. So labour was going to be the issue on that. And because of that, everything I did on that farm now has just been totally labour focused in terms of making sure that I can leave that farmyard at 5:30 every evening and give myself a lifestyle that replicates other jobs out there, not being tied to that farm to maybe, as you see a lot of farms, maybe sitting going to 7:30 or 8 at night. And it's possible, but I suppose it's just looking at the details of where maybe time management's wasted. And it's a focus that a lot of farms probably need to look at more, because if you're trying to bring new entrants into farming, or you're trying to employ somebody to come and do a job for you, you cannot expect them to be doing the labour that maybe a lot of farms are doing. They're getting up at 6 in the morning, they're working to maybe 7 or 8 at night, and bringing in people to do that and expecting them to do it just won't happen. So it has to be. So in terms of making sure that that's a focus for farms is very important, like in the long term, particularly for the industry going forward. So yeah, it's a personal one to me, because it was a key focus when I set up my farm, and so far I think it's going well. So I make sure that I use contractors. I don't invest a lot in machinery, and there's different things on the farm that maybe even going down the route of a block calving system. When I had set up, I could have said, right, do I go down robots? I says, that's all year-round calving, or do I go a block calving system? And that's the way I wanted to go, because I wanted all my jobs read up, and then I can focus, and then maybe, and like John, this is actually going to be the first year now I've went down the true spring calving route, where I'm going to dry off all the cows now for Christmas. And I never actually seen myself getting to that stage, and I actually can't believe that I'm going to do it. But you get there, and then you realise this makes it a far better lifestyle. So yeah,
I think it's a very important consideration, and I suppose it ties in with the theme of what John was saying. There's no one fit for every farm in terms of sustainability. Every farm has to look at how they operate in terms of their labour, in terms of their systems, in terms of their work-life balance, and I think that's a critically important piece. Conscious of time, and I know the guys are getting ready to serve lunch, so maybe just by way of a final question that I'll put to all three of you, and I suppose it ties in well with today in terms of over the next 5 years, like the changes that are forecast to take place, that could appear daunting in terms of many farms, certainly when you listen to all the various schemes that George outlined in his presentation, when those are presented all at once. But I suppose from a government or industry or a combination of both, what do you think would be the most helpful to you in the next 12 months to help you develop the next stage of your farm sustainability journey? I'll maybe come to Mark first on that.
Yeah, well, in relation to what we've heard today, there's nothing that I don't think is deliverable, and many of us are already doing a lot of those things. But I think for the wider farming sector, there needs to be more of this. There needs to be a lot of education done. I think these things need to be brought in incrementally, and there needs good lead-in time so that people can adapt to the business, adapt it to suit their business. We talked a lot today about sustainability, and there's 3 pillars. There's people, planet, and profit. And if the supply chain can't deliver us profitability, well, we can't, as farmers, deliver the other 2.
No, and we often hear that it's hard to be green if you're in the red. It's a term that you often hear referred to in terms of sustainability, but it is all 3 pillars. There's no question. But maybe just in terms of that sort of next 12-month period in terms of support, might come to you, David.
Well, I think I suppose in John Gilliland's presentation and or discussion with yourself, Ian, and he talked about the 1-1. They're the very, as John said, low-hanging fruits that you can take. They're the things that you can do today that are going to improve the profitability of your business. So, likes of the soil testing or something, or the likes of, say, something like the genetic selection. That's just that. Every dairy farmer gets their catalogue and they go click, click, click. If it's something in there that this bull has, better performance in terms, you'll just click it. That's an easy one to make an improvement on. So those are the 2 sort of things. But in terms of communicating with farmers, going to be the big one. When you hear John talking about how maybe they're calculating and stuff, and maybe they're not calculating. And maybe they're not calculated in the way that farmers would like them to do it in order to, so because of that, you're getting pushback from farms. And they're maybe even looking at these schemes and you're saying to them, but this is a 1-1 for you, but they'll say, yeah, but until you do this right, then maybe I'm not going to do it. So there's a big communication thing in there, I think, that needs to be done in order to farmers to start taking up things. Because and I would hear it in discussions, some people will say, I know there's Deal Farms doing they're doing a survey at the minute on farms and offering a bonus on it. But you read in different discussions, there's some boys that are just going to say, I'm not doing that because until I see it being done correctly, then I'm not going to give them that information.
Look, and it is a key challenge. I think the batteries must have run out. I think we're getting a signal. So I suppose maybe just finally then to yourself, John, just in terms of, what do you think from your own perspective in terms of support over the next 12 months as you develop your sustainability journey? What would be most helpful from a government or industry perspective?
Ian, just go back. Did you start off that question with government and industry? Is that right?
I did indeed, yeah.
In my opinion, it would be useful if governments would stick to governance and stay out of politics. It would be useful for industry to realise that planning for the next 12 months doesn't start on Monday morning. My next 12 months was planned almost 3 years ago. In 3 years' time, I may be able to implement some of the things that I plan now in the next 12 months. It was almost a loaded question when you ask it. It'd be more important to do the right things than it is to do things right. Farming, and particular dairy farming, it's a slow-moving vehicle. It's very difficult to turn. And making the wrong decisions early on have vast implications further down the line. If my father decided in the 80s to rip out all the hedges, I would have a very different looking farm today. Fortunately, he didn't. He took up every environmental scheme that was ever going, and likewise I have done the same. We have planted a lot of hedges. We boast a vast number of wild mammals and birds and wildlife on the farm. So going forward in the next 12 months, I've already my plan made. It will be further after that. Then I'll take another wee look and pick out some of the key pieces that suit my family and my business and my home.
I think that's a key message for us all. I think certainly, you know, if you don't plan ahead, you know, you're on a road to, I suppose, failure, as the old adage. But as I say, I would like to thank each of our three participants today. As I say, I would like to have had much more time with you today, but I'm conscious we're now sort of eating into lunchtime. We don't want to hold people back from getting the opportunity for a quick bite. But I suppose just before I exit the stage and hand back to Dermot, I would just like you to thank our three farmers for participating today.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, gentlemen. And again, some very common themes coming through. One size does not fit all. Three very different farmers with three very, very different systems approaching it in different ways, but all aiming to get the one result. What struck me is the balancing and the planning that these farmers are having to do. The environmental actions and the science of what they're doing, farmers have always changed their practices once they have a reasonable belief that it'll work. And they're never afraid to invest. And that has been consistent down through the generations. The social side, the people side, the labour efficiencies, and now I think it's very reasonable for farmers to start talking about their life balance. And they are, while they love the land, they're not slaves to the land. And that is something that I think is emerging in a different generation of farmers. Regenerative farming sounds like another generation that are going to do the right things on the soil and with the water for the next generations. That is not a short-term approach. And these farmers are trying to balance productivity and profitability and the environment. So they really do need to plan ahead. And they are all very, very conscious of the need for education and the need to share knowledge. As they were talking, I wrote down 4 words. One was data, one was information, one was knowledge, and one was wisdom. And they're all similar but very different things. So I think one of the themes that has come through from that discussion is that all of those farmers gather data. We need data. But data does not become information until you assemble it, interpret it, understand it, and know what the key messages are that you're going to communicate from that information. And that's part of the journey that we're on. Once you develop the knowledge, it's like that manure. It's of no value until you spread it around. And that is obviously a next step, or a step that other people and people in this audience are absolutely involved in, is that once we have reasonable, and I'm not looking for absolute, confidence in the messages, that we spread those messages from one farm to another, from one industry player to another. And then the last one is the wisdom. And that's the wisdom to know that it's not perfection, and the wisdom to know that things that we do today are things that will be important for us in about 100 years' time. And the wisdom to know that it isn't perfection. And that while if we get 80% of this right in the next number of years, we'll have a mighty job done. So, ladies and gentlemen, it falls to me just to do a few more formal things to close out today's event. And the theme was data in action. There is no doubt of the importance of data in dairy farming, and that it extends well beyond operational efficiencies, productivity and market responsiveness. Data brings clarity of direction, it helps us make decisions, it brings credibility to the whole process of environmental improvement. And like any journey, we need to know where we're starting from, we need to know how we're going to get there, and we need to know when we arrived. And all along that journey, we have to expect the question from the back seat, are we there yet? Are we there yet? We need that data and information to deliver on our environmental promise, and we have heard many practical examples of how farmers use the data to improve environmental and sustainable practices, to enhance their stewardship of the environment, and to improve their own lifestyles and hopefully their profitability. They are tracking metrics like feed conversion, fertility rates, lifetime performance, water usage, soon to be carbon emissions, and that enables farmers to demonstrate their commitment to environmental sustainability. It builds consumer confidence in farming and farmers, two slightly different things, and in our industry, and helps us maintain a market share, which ultimately is where all the profitability is coming from. It also helps us open up new opportunities. As we come to the end, and this is very close to the end of this EU sustainability programme, which has ran for close to 6 or 7 years, we can reflect on how, as a sector, our conversations have changed. The emphasis has moved from production to productivity in partnership with our farmers and customers. We're demonstrating our willingness to adapt and change our practices, to adopt new technologies, to use data and information to drive environmental improvement. Our farmers and processors have the sustainability agenda and new practices front and centre of their businesses as we work collectively to address the challenges ahead. Before I do some of the thank yous, I need to mention the person that started this programme, and that's Dr. Mike Johnson, whom I just can't catch his eye because the light is in mine. But just to say, well done, Mike, for having the vision, or should I say the wisdom, to start this programme in the first place. We wish Ian well in his endeavours to follow behind it. But this conversation had to start somewhere, and Mike, we'd just like to thank you very, very much for that. And so finally, I'd like to thank all of the speakers, all of the contributors. I'd like to thank the hotel, and I'd like to thank the organisers of the event. Everything has gone swimmingly. And most of all, I'd like to thank you, the attendees, because without your help and support across the entire industry, this journey wouldn't continue. It's a long journey, it's a journey of change, and we are all in it together, for richer or for poorer. So, lunch is on my right, your left, and please feel free to network and chat through. If you want a copy of or a video of today's proceedings, it will be emailed out to attendees. So thank you very much for your attention, and safe home.